All right. Um, well, welcome to our training today, which is enhancing tier one. And so this is really, we had a here comes somebody. All right, we had a training previously that was just an overview of the problem-solving team process, and so now we're going to dive into tier one and talk a little bit about what does that problem-solving team look like at tier one. So today, what I'm hoping that you get to walk away with is how to know if you need to intervene at tier one, and then what are some interventions for tier one. How do you do intervention monitoring at tier one? And then we're going to do just a little bit of talking about how PLCs, differentiation, and universal design for learning fit with tier one. So we'll kind of dive in. Do you feel like if you have any questions along the way, just let me know. Um, and, um, and we'll stop to answer them. So here is kind of a tiered model, that we often see when we look at things like RTI, MTSS, those sorts of things. And so when we look, we see that we have, we have conceptual tier models do work for both academic and behavior, and then also. So in this triangle, what I liked about this was it did add some. For, like, sometimes we need to do extension or some advanced things for students who are advanced. So it's kind of then provides another little tier at the bottom. So with this, we look to see that maybe there's 1 to 5% of our students who are probably in that advanced range. And then 80 to 85% of our students should be in kind of this tier one, or where universal instruction and behavior or behavior interventions are working for, again, about 80 to 85% of students. We really want about 5 to 10% of students to be within a strategic group. And so this is where we have groups of students maybe working on an intervention. And then we really only want 1 to 5% of students to be in that intensive individual intervention. And so again, 80 to 85% is what we want to see our tier one working for. And then when we look at kind of our continuums of support, we're really looking to provide the support kind of across all of those needs. So again, we want evidence-based instruction for all students, where the majority of the students are able to access and be successful with that evidence-based instruction. And then on the enrichment end, then we have kind of a secondary supports that really help to kind of elaborate or enrich some instruction for those who are more advanced, and then maybe a tertiary support for those who are really accelerated or very advanced. How are we helping to meet their needs within kind of our school system? And then on the other side, right, where we're doing maybe some intervention, again, we want to make sure that we're having supports that either elaborate or have added practice in for those groups of students for which that total evidence-based instruction is not working as well. And then we also need something intensive to really accelerate students if they're not successful within either of those. So in thinking about our system, we want to ensure that we really have this continuum of supports for our students. We know when given supports kind of as we have them in school. So if we don't really have that full breadth of supports for students, what we often see is as they go on in school, we have students that we have our group of students who, again, this is kind of the success trajectory, they're moving along, but then our group of students who maybe are not meeting that tend to fall off in these lower grades, or in the higher grades, I'm sorry. So where we're not really seeing, just with our kind of non-tiered kind of existing supports, often we're really not meeting those intensely enough. And what we see overall is that there isn't really a catching up of students, that they're just kind of continuing on and level off with those kinds of supports. But we do know that if we really enhance our supports, within the school system. So we're providing kind of some scientific research-based intervention supports. We kind of align our infrastructure to really support, again, kind of that tiered support system, provide systemic supports, and really look at our instructional practices. What we see is students who maybe initially were falling below other students in their learning, that gap does close when we provide more support or differentiated support for those students. And so that's one of the reasons why working through a problem-solving team can really help us build our system towards this, where we actually are helping catch up students if they are struggling. And so this is just another, I guess I just liked this model too, just kind of showing, right, that our continuum of instructional practices, we need, again, to provide that across different needs. So first, let's talk a little bit about what is quality core instruction. So if we have students who are not doing well at our tier 1, we should probably identify, well, what are we expecting with quality core instruction? And so what we do expect is that teachers are using research or evidence-based practices within their classroom, and that we're designing our instruction for all learners, not just for a middle group of learners that we're focusing on, that we're providing some sort of differentiation based on student needs, and that we're collecting data on those needs, and we're being proactive about that data. So we're incorporating that data into our instruction, excuse me, to decide to make changes to our instruction based on what that data is telling us. We also need to make sure that we have high instructional engaged time. So we want to make sure that we're providing the amount of time for our core classes that align with what research is saying. So 90-minute reading blocks in elementary is really, research is saying, like, that's the amount of time that really allows students to be able to really hit all the reading excuse me, instructionally is best for students for reading, and that we're making sure, again, that during that 90 minutes, during this intensive instruction time, we're not seeing a lot of interruptions, that the class is really highly engaged during that time. We also want to ensure that our curriculum is aligned vertically and horizontally, so that we have, consistent curricular practices kind of across the curriculum that aligns with our standards and objectives, and that there's really a seamless transition between grades. So that the things that you're learning in one grade flow right into the next grade, and so on. And so this also is important, particularly if you're moving from one building to another, or from one, elementary to middle school to high school. So how are we assured that our curriculum is aligned across those different settings, so that so students there isn't a gap where students are expected to know something, for example, at the middle school level, that they really weren't taught at that elementary school. And really, to do that, right, we need to provide opportunities for some collaboration, both within school and outside of school. So these are, again, things we'd be wanting to see within our curriculum and instruction. We'd also want to see some evidence-based instructional strategies. So again, there's tons of different resources about evidence-based instructional strategies. Some of these are a little bit older, I'm not going to lie. This information is from a PowerPoint that I gave a couple years ago, or more than a couple maybe, but again, sometimes some oldies are still goodies. So I know a lot of our districts at NESC were involved in that core literacy project, and so that, again, is still some great instructional strategies embedded within there that are still relevant today. Um, some other high yield instructional strategies. We want to make sure that that we're really maximizing the possibilities for each learner. We want to make sure that we're doing planning based on the kids we have in our classroom, not a model student, for example. And again, just using what we know in evidence and research with the types of things that we're doing within the classroom to enhance learning. So now that we kind of know, maybe what are some of those, what are we really looking for? Or what would we hope to have within a well-developed curriculum and instruction, system? We want to talk a little bit about how are we going to solve problems if there's issues at tier 1. So in the previous training, I believe that the team talked a little bit about ISIL. So ISIL stands for Instruction, Curriculum, Environment, and Learner. So this is our framework that we really use when thinking about problem solving. So when we know that there's an issue or something's not going well, we want to think about how is instruction being delivered? How is the curriculum occurring? And then when we also look at the environment and then the student learner. So today, because we're looking at tier 1, we're going to focus primarily on instruction, curriculum, and we'll talk a little bit about some environmental things that we want to think about when trying to solve our problem if students are not being successful at tier 1. So our biggest decision we have to make is when we look at the data, we need to decide, does the core curriculum reach 80% of that student population? And so the people who will be involved in that decision making could be your problem solving team. They would be looking at data pulled from your benchmark data or either other curriculum data to determine, is that meeting 80% of your student population? So so this is a great tool to kind of for teams to use to determine where do we solve the problem. So sometimes what we see is like students, we know we have students who are not achieving. So the first thing that sometimes happens is that we try to solve things at the student level, but that doesn't really work very well if the issue is really occurring for it's more than 20% of your students. So we can't, it's kind of like pet hoarding, right? You can only help so many. So we want to like help a lot of people, but at some point, right, it doesn't work anymore. We don't have enough time. And so sometimes we see that with interventions, right? So if we have more than 20% of our students needing intervention, it doesn't work to solve all those problems individually or even in small groups. It just taxes out your resources too much. So what we want to do then is take a look at the curriculum and instruction and make those decisions about what might be happening there. So first, we would look at your benchmark data. And if you don't have benchmark data, that's okay. You can use other data that you have from your classroom. So you could look at your Smarter Balance test scores and do breakdowns into your grade levels for Smarter Balance. You could also just use curricular information to try to determine, based on some curriculum evaluations, even using unit test scores. Again, did 80% of our students really meet on those types of, on our curriculum? And so if they did, our next question is, are most of those learners part of an identified subgroup? Meaning, are they all ELL? Are they all male or female? Do they all fall into a race or ethnic group? Are they all free and reduced lunch? So we want to ask some additional questions there. Most of those learners who are not meeting benchmarks are part of a group, then we would want to really solve that, at the group or class level. So that really would be more of a tier 2 intervention. If this is not occurring, then we are going to solve the problem at the curricular and systems level. And that is our tier 1 intervention. So we're going to use the problem-solving process within our curriculum and instruction to determine what maybe needs to change. So with our problem-solving process, I'm sure lots of people have seen this before, but right, we're going to look and say, what is the problem? So we're going to help identify why are these gaps occurring between the performance and the grade level expectation. Then we're going to think about the instructional variables, the curriculum variables that could be impacting that. And we're going to consider those and then develop an intervention to address those things, and then collect some additional data to see if our intervention worked. If it worked, great, we move on. If not, we just head back into problem identification to try to figure out what maybe needs to change. I think sometimes working through this problem-solving process is sometimes easier really at the student level, because you can just focus in on the one student. It's much harder to have conversations, I think, about instruction and curriculum. The work seems a little bigger and sometimes a little heavier, and feels a little bit less like you have the ability to always make some of those changes. There's a lot of confounding factors, I think, at that curriculum and instruction level, where maybe we're not 100% sure what we're picking to focus on is really the problem. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to get through this process and find out, okay, we thought it was this, but we now know it wasn't. There's nothing, that's all part of the process. It's okay. You just dive back in and use your data to try to find another area that could be a potential reason for that gap, and just start the process again. So it's not a failure. You are in a learning process where you've gone through this. You've now learned something more. You know more than you did before. We just head right back into the into the problem-solving process until we feel like we've identified and made some progress on using an intervention. Okay. So we're looking at that systems curricular level. So where would we intervene? So if we looked and we knew that, our instruction was not hitting 80%, that we had more than 20% of students needing some sort of intervention, what are the things that we would do? So for instruction, again, some of these we'd kind of consider, what are those things that we know about good instruction? What are some of those things we know about good curriculum? What are some things that we know that impact the environment? We're going to look for these sorts of things to consider whether we think this could be a trigger for why our students are not achieving, or why that curriculum and instruction isn't meeting at that 80%. So let's talk about some interventions in curriculum. Maybe when we look at this, part of our discussion is leading us to realize that we don't really have great horizontal or vertical alignment. Or maybe we are recognizing through discussions that we are not all using evidence-based practices for instruction within our classrooms. So maybe we need to think about some coaching and mentoring, or how do we learn from the teacher in the classroom who maybe whose class did really well? What did they do? What practices are they using that we could then get all classrooms to use that would help boost the students to that 80%. And again, that collaboration based on that performance data. So collaborating together to be able to produce those solutions is good practice. For instruction, some interventions could be focusing on some formative assessments prior to giving instruction, so that we kind of know what students know going in, and then we can fill in the gaps, maybe based on what that formative assessment is telling us. Using common assignments and assessments so that then if you do have multiple classrooms, there's a common understanding of what is expected, and we're assessing the same way so that the feedback we're getting is the same. You also can preload skills that maybe just maybe weren't taught. I remember at one school I worked at, we adopted a new math curriculum, and the math curriculum really did not have a high focus on math fluency. So it was really heavy on problem solving. The earlier grades were good at learning basic facts, but not really on math fluency. So and by no fault of the teachers, you get a new curriculum, you're trying to just follow along, it's a lot to learn. And they had dropped off the math fluency things that they used to do. And we ended up seeing that within our scores. So we had students who were really struggling with math fluency on our benchmark testing. It was clear that this was a tier one issue. So as a group, the teachers talked, we ended up coming back and putting back in some of those math fluency things that the teachers were doing previously. And we were able to kind of boost those scores back up, and then ended up, getting most students that 80% at benchmark. And now we could start to do some additional interventions with those other students who didn't make it. So again, sometimes there are just gaps in the curriculum that we might not be aware of, or maybe there's just some gaps in instruction that again we just identify and try to address.
Thank
So
you.
we can some other interventions is really focusing on universal design for learning, which we'll talk a little bit later. I'll kind of explain a little bit more about that. But that's really ensuring that there's differentiation or different ways for students to learn, so that it provides different avenues rather than a singular avenue for students to learn. We're incorporating different things to help students learn new skills. We look, another part that can be really big, for our instruction is our students actively engaged. So how do our transitions look? How is the pacing of our classroom doing? Is it occurring at a just right, kind of using Goldilocks, right? Is it just right, or is it too slow or too fast? Are we getting students' responses? Are we having them respond? Are we getting the feedback that we need to be able to know that students are understanding, what we need them to understand? Are we allowing active thinking time? And are we assuring that the things that we're doing are at their instruction, are really at their true instructional level? So if we can focus on these things, often what we'll see is that we'll see that that achievement really goes up if we can get that instructional engaged time to increase. And I know this has at least been a challenge for a lot of schools following COVID. I just see like our students have a lot. They just don't have as long of attention span overall that they did before. So sometimes thinking about how, although I was giving instruction, how engaged were my students during that time? Are there some things I need to change to kind of boost that engagement? Do we think engagement was part of the reason why we were maybe not hitting benchmark? We can also consider some interventions for the environment. So thinking about, is our environment distraction free? Have we addressed behaviors that are occurring within the environment? So we know that if there are a lot of behaviors occurring in a classroom, that can really impact not only the students that are having the behaviors, but the other students too. So is that maybe something that we need to address? Do we need to add some visual supports or offer some alternate seating? Are students getting enough breaks? And is the social environment positive? Do we have a good culture in our classroom that students want to come and learn and feel accepted? How are our classroom transitions going? You know, are they smooth, or are they taking minutes out of our instruction time? Do students know what to expect, or are they feeling like they're unsure, and it just takes longer to get everything started? And again, how our materials organized kind of goes along with that transition. How smooth are things happening within our environment? So as we think about why we might not have 80% at benchmark, there's a lot really to think about, right? So we want to be thinking about all of those things. Um, and again, that's why it kind of can be more difficult when we head right to the student. We're like just focused on the student, but here we have quite a few things we can be thinking about. So really, our process is really similar in some ways to how we would look at this for students, right? So what we want to do is determine where the gap is in the curriculum instruction. So we know we might have students who are not at benchmark, but we need to understand what is it about them not being at benchmark, right? Are there some trends within the data that we collected in that benchmark data? So is it is it is our do we have certain sound blends that students aren't as strong in? Do we feel like it could be vocabulary that's impacting? So we might have to do some additional dives into that benchmark data or into your curricular assessments to try to identify what is the gap specifically. If it's completely random, well, now we know that too, right? So now that's a different discussion. Maybe there's some other things. Maybe it's less instruction. Maybe it's more environment, for example. If we're finding that students didn't meet the benchmark, but they did it but they have scattered skills. Versus maybe, again, like that example I gave where we dropped off in math fluency and then talked about it and realized we weren't doing the instruction there. So after we try to identify again what some of those underlying causes are, where the gap is, and if there's any trends to the gap, then we're asking, is the gap in the curriculum? Is it due to the instruction? Is it potentially due to the environment? Then from there, we would have a discussion about what is it about the curriculum or that instruction or the environment that we think could be intervening. As a team, talk through those things and then pick something to address. So you would pick the gap that you chose, that you wanted to address. So let's say with instruction, we realized that maybe there's 3 classrooms and two classrooms weren't using really some evidence-based instructional strategies, but we had 1 classroom that was. So now our intervention is, how do we help all teachers be able to use that evidence-based instructional strategy? And so we would make that the intervention. And so we would address that through that maybe change in instructional practice or your intervention. Then after you've kind of selected what you're going to do for an intervention, you're going to set a goal. So what do you think you'll see at your next benchmark assessment? And so we're going to put that intervention in place. And then we're going to go to benchmark assessment and look to see, did that help boost our students up above into that 80%? So now do we have less than 20% who are needing intervention? And so you sometimes it doesn't, depending on what resources you have available and what is going on, you may not want to wait 100%. You may not want to wait all the way to your next benchmark assessment. You can also use other things to kind of look at your progress before the benchmark assessment. So if you have some formative assessments that help tell you this, curriculum assessments, or even just using some of the progress monitoring tools can help also tell you whether you are making progress on that on your goal. If you're not seeing progress on your goal, we would just want to come back, have a discussion. Do we think we're on the right track? Did we select the wrong thing as maybe the potential cause of our students, or did we select the wrong intervention? have that discussion, decide if you need to make changes. And if you do implement the change, again, kind of going back through that problem solving model. I talked a little bit about this, but it's really important again that we intervene at tier 1. If not, we just end up with too many students at tier 2, which is really very, very heavy resource driven. So, so all of our resources end up getting expended at tier 2, and often resources meaning time, effort, those sort of things, not necessarily always like money resources. But it really is, it becomes very intense and really feeling like you just don't have enough time to really address all the issues that are occurring. So that's why we want to make sure that we're looking at that tier 1 if we're not at that 80%. So any questions that anyone has so far? Okay. All right. I just want to spend a little bit of time. Sometimes we talk about things that we would maybe want to see from instruction or curriculum. And I just want to dive a little bit deeper into some of those and give some plugs for, some things that you might already be doing or want to learn more about. So really, PLCs are the perfect place to really talk about and address tier 1 interventions. So, the purpose of PLCs really is to come together, discuss those results that you have with formative, interim, and summative assessments, and then really collaborate about what strategies did we use that were successful, how do we collaborate, again, to improve instruction on certain skills. Maybe there's a new staff or sometimes a staff that's been around that maybe needs to learn a new strategy. How do we mentor each other through that? And I think it's important too to clarify those outcomes by grades or even by classrooms so that we're sure that we don't have a gap occurring in how we're addressing things within one grade and then it smoothly transitions to the other. It's also a great time to really collaborate around how everyone's differentiating for the students that they have in their classroom. So sometimes sometimes when there's just a lot going on in a classroom, it's hard to think creatively about how to differentiate or what some different strategies are to differentiate. So coming together and having that be part of a PLC also just, again, helps. There's always better idea gathering in groups rather than just thinking on your own. So that can be a great way to use your PLC time. Talking a little bit about differentiation, we want to make sure that we're not just providing accommodations, but we're really considering how we're meeting all the students' needs within our classroom. So I like this graphic, which just kind of lays out a framework for differentiation. So it's really a response to learners' needs. And then there are principles of differentiation, respectful tasks, the curriculum is of quality, we're teaching up or encouraging students to be achieving more than they maybe think is possible, offering flexible grouping. We're doing some continual assessment to make sure that we know what we're doing is working with students, and we're really building an educational community in that classroom. Teachers can differentiate either in the content that they're providing, the process that they're teaching to students. They can differentiate through the product that they're asking for, the affect or the learning environment. So how we're setting up or how we ask students to be in the environment. And we're going to differentiate according to students' readiness, their interest, and then their learning profile or what we believe their strengths and needs are. And then here's some instructional strategies that just align with that. So it just gives sometimes we need to step back, kind of consider framework, and then think about how are we implementing those things within differentiation within our classrooms. And the last thing I want to give a little plug for is universal design for learning. So we have not heard much about, we haven't had a universal design for learning training here in South Dakota that I am aware of. There is a website, it's the CAST.org website that has many awesome resources regarding universal design for learning. So what I love about universal design for learning is that it provides equal opportunities for students to learn, but we're flexible about how students learn, the materials that they are used for learning. We're providing some different assessments to meet the needs, all while maintaining some high expectations. And so there's 3 principles for universal design for learning, and that is that we provide multiple means of representation. So what students need to learn, we're giving different ways for students to learn that. And then we're giving multiple means of action and expression. So we're providing different ways for students to express what they know, and then also what they're doing with what they're learning. And then lastly, there's multiple means of engagement. So we're using a variety of methods to engage students around what we're teaching. So a traditional approach really kind of assumes that student diversity is a problem, where universal design for learning is approaching a classroom already knowing that the diversity is the norm. So I'm not teaching towards just what's average, but I'm considering all the students, and that's where I'm starting from, not starting from the norm and then making accommodations for the other students. It also is really like universal design for learning is really you don't really even need you often may not need accommodations and modifications if we're really designing lessons considering all of the students in your classroom. So I like the idea of like considering what would work for all students, and now I don't have to accommodate the instruction because I've already built the instruction for all the students in my classroom. So a traditional kind of form would be we have a lesson, then we think of the accommodations students might need, and then students are able to access the lesson. With UDL, we're considering the students we have in our classroom. We could create an integrated lesson where all of those needs for those students are kind of integrated in, and then we see some student success. So Chopped is a great kind of oh my gosh, not parallel. That's the best I can come up with today for universal design for learning. So if you've watched the show Chopped, right, it's on the Food Network. It was a big thing for my family. We used to love that. So each chef picks up, so there's usually 3 chefs competing against each other. They pick up some mandatory ingredients. So when we think about this, like we have mandatory standards that we have to teach. So we pick those up, just like the food items. And then what we do is the chefs on Chopped get to go into, they can pick up other foods that are going to make their dish good. They can go in and pick, they've got these amazing mixers and like all the cooking equipment you want, right? They can go and select those to be able to make the dish that they want to make, right? So when we think about it, we have the standards, but we can really go in just like the chefs and pick the additional ingredients that our students need to learn and the additional tools that we need to be able to help them learn. And then what comes out is something similar but different, right? So each student with universal design for learning is able to come out knowing the same thing, but it might look a little different for all of them. So just like on Chopped, right? These all contain those same core ingredients, but it just looks a little different based on what you picked up and put all of those. Grant doesn't like those. Those look disgusting. Yeah, I know. I always liked Grant when they had the unusual food ingredients because you're like, how are they ever going to make something good out of that, right? So, all right. And so we want to make sure, again, that the things that we're doing are that we're working in a modern kitchen. So we're considering modern things and things that we know work with students. If we were working in an antiquated kitchen where maybe things didn't work or didn't work as quickly, we wouldn't end up with the same dishes at the end, or they might not taste as good or look as good, or like Grant thinks maybe they don't look good at all, regardless of which kitchen you're working in. But we want to make sure as teachers that we are, that we're working in environments and we're thinking about things, that we have kind of a well-stocked, plethora of things that we can use to really help make our dishes or our students successful. So, all right. That is the end of what I have to share with you, but I am really open to questions or discussions if anyone has any that they would like to ask. Okay. Well, I will stop the recording here in a minute, but I'll hang on for a little bit. Next month's topic is problem identification. So Nikki, Chris, and Maria will talk a little bit more about how to identify a problem within your problem-solving team, and then next steps of what to do about that. And so that will occur on November 18th at 3:30. And again, we will record that one as well, and be able to post that for you.
Will we use the same link for that one?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
The
always
same.
this.
Yep. It'll all should all be on the same link.
Okay.
Aniki, is it possible to